Welcome to the Bronxville Zoning Board of Appeals. I am Stuart McIntosh. I will be chairing tonight's meeting. I'm joined with my colleagues, alternate Mary Ellen Carpenter, John Brown, Greg Jackno, and Marty Muir. And Greg is also an alternate. So we will all be voting tonight. Reminder, to get a variance approved, you need a majority. So tonight that will require 3 votes supporting the variance tonight. So tonight we have one case, Grosvenor's Road. And who's going to be presenting tonight for the applicant?
I will be doing so, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and your name is?
My name is Julian Joshua. Despite my accent, I have been a U.S. citizen for 5 years, and I had the great honor to be inducted as a citizen and take the oath at Mount Vernon, and was welcomed by George Washington when I took the oath, along with 100 other guests who were invited on this auspicious occasion.
Okay.
Now, I hold a power of attorney, if necessary, on behalf of Mrs. Elizabeth Edsel, who is the beneficial owner, or the owner of the house, the legal owner of the house.
Okay.
So would you like me to hand that up?
Sure.
So get it on the record, if we may. Can you take it up, Robert? Okay. Now, if we can go back to...
Sure.
Can we start, please,
One
on
of you.
this? If you see there, this is what we are here for tonight. Now, many people have said to me, we do not understand what all this is about. And I had to explain to them that this is an application for an area variance, because there are, according to the code, play sets or recreation structures are not allowed in front yards. Now, it all depends what you mean by a front yard, and the code has its own definition of what front yards are. But let me go back to can we see slide 2, please, Mr. Taft? No, no, please go on. No, we have a different one. No, that is, I have a presentation here.
Right.
That we sent to you.
Yeah.
Not the application. No, that is Mrs.
Additional information from one governor.
Okay, that's it. No, that is a photo that was supplied by the neighbor who lives opposite on the other side of Avon, Mr. Harris, who has been a vocal opponent of this project right from the start. And he took it would appear he took this photo from his attic. So if you look at it, you'll see exactly where it is. So let's look and see what it actually looks like from his front door. Can we have slide 3, please? That is the view he gets from his front door. Now, I would like you to take a good look at that, please, because Mr. Harris has complained that every time he comes out of his front door, he sees this terrible object in front of him. Now, if you, just to give you the location of where this is I believe it is the only mid-century modern home within the square mile. I've heard that there may be one other, but it's a very unique house, and it is also sited on a very unique location. How are we going?
My laser pointer was
Oh, what happened to it?
Here's my laser pointer.
No,
I left it here.
Well, we'll move it.
well, yeah,
Is that a laser pointer?
here.
There it is.
thank
I'm
you.
giving it so that you can.
Okay.
down
Thank you
anything
so
you
much.
want.
That's very helpful.
Thank you
I
so
wasn't
much.
instructed about this before. But I don't think we really need to, well, we may do. I need a little bit of coaching in this,
Right there.
please.
The red button.
Okay. Now, many of you will probably know this location. As I said, it is the only mid-century modern house within the square mile. It was actually designed and constructed by David Henken, who was the main collaborator and one of the most prolific disciples of Frank Lloyd Wright. And you'll see that that house is located in a very unusual location. You can't see the house, but you will in a minute. On the left you have, that is Leonard Road. There is Avon on the other side of Mr. Harris's hedge. There is Governor's Road going up the side. Now, the address of the home is 1 Governor's, but it is located on a promontory. Oh, no, but I'll explain that to you in a minute. It's located on a promontory, you probably know it, which is distinguished by a high elevation going from front to rear. The house is at the back. I'll explain that in a minute. And it is, as you can see, very, very bosky. And let me show you what this is about, because this is the object in question. Can we go to slide 4, please? It has been, this is the place set in question. It has been described as being painted orange and green. In fact, the color is not orange, it is the natural color of the cedar out of which it is constructed. Above, it has been painted with high-quality green stain because we heard from various complainants that they hated the color. And so in order to mitigate any objections they might have and to make sure that it blended into the background, you will see that any part of that which at the present time is still visible from outside is totally camouflaged and all but invisible from any reasonable viewpoint. Now, this is not a huge monstrosity of a place set. It's not like one of these Disneyland, Disney World type place sets that you sometimes see advertised. You will see there, this is the only level area of ground on the entire property on which a place set or recreational structure of a similar kind could be located. If we go to the next slide, perhaps. There we are. Would you please show the next one? That is an aerial view of the home, and you will see where it is. All of that is very rocky, many, many, many trees, very green. There's the other side is the front door. You can't see. The front door of this home is actually on the other side by the garage. So the front door faces onto Leonard. This is the driveway going down to Governor's. Avon runs around here, and up here, Governor's continues round the corner towards the home of Mr. Mark Q. Davis, who has no line of sight whatever onto the place set, and only, I believe he is probably up here, right round the corner, on the corner of Avon and Ridge. Now, I should say I'm very familiar with this property because we have been living in the Edsels' home since January, when we moved from California to come and live in Westchester County. We are in the happy position of having a Bronxville postcode, but our home, which is currently under reconstruction, is just over the border in Yonkers. But I am very familiar with the location. I'm very familiar with the layout of the property and also the surrounding area because we walk around it every day. You'll see it slopes from there right up to the top. The home itself is located very close to the rear boundary. That is the only adjoining owner behind there, and the backyard I would imagine you would describe as non-conforming, because when it was built in 1950, I imagine that the code was not as explicit as it is today. Behind is that there's only one property behind it. If we turn to the survey, you'll see that exactly. Can we have the next slide, please? You'll see there on this survey the layout of the property, and at the bottom there, that is where the place set is located. There you are, you see Leonard. The place set is located, and that is the... Now, that may give a misimpression because the only level area is around there up to there. It has to be level in order to take a plate set. And then behind it, the slope already starts and going up to the back of the property, and it is probably a 30-degree or more slope, which you approach there. Now, are there any questions about the layout? I imagine you are all very familiar with this property.
I had a question on area
Yes,
4 for Paul. Given that this house faces 3 streets, would area 4 be considered a front yard?
Which area?
4 up and then, see that 4 in the,
Yes, it's considered 3 fronts, in my opinion.
Yeah.
okay.
Well, I thank you for raising it. It's a very good question because I'm going to be coming on to that in a couple of slides where we will explain that when is a front yard not a front yard, or when is a side yard a front yard. We have got, in that property, we have got 3 front yards in terms of the definition of the code. We have no side yard, and we have a rear yard at the back, which is very, very narrow indeed. That is the boundary with the adjoining house. So you can see our backyard is basically that. That's what we have as a backyard, just there. And the house behind, that is the only adjoining property. Now, can I just remind you, please, I'm sure you're familiar with it already, can I remind you of thank you, Robert. We are seeking an area variation from Village Code section 3108A. And then you see, can we have the next one, please, Mr. Taft? You will see that is the disposition in the code which is controlling here. In a one-family, may I just read it out? In a one-family residence AAA district, and of course AAA applies to AA as well, no building or premises shall be used, and no building or part of a building shall be erected, which is arranged, intended, or designed to be used, in whole or in part, for any purpose except the following, and then those are listed, but then it goes on to list accessory uses, and the accessory uses which are specifically defined are garden house, tool house, playhouse, greenhouse, or swimming pool, play sets and other recreational structures incidental to the residential use of the premises are not operated for gain. So a play set is specifically a permitted use, and that is going to be very important for your determination. So there we are, play set and other recreational structures. I'll come in a minute to what recreational structures are in terms of the code. They shall be set back a minimum of 10 feet from any property line and will be screened from the view of abutting properties by means of an opaque fence or a thick hedge with a height of not less than 6.5 feet. The only adjoining property you'll see is behind, and the house is between that property and the place set. So they have no view whatever, but were that place set to be, were our front yard where it is currently located to have been a side yard or a backyard, or one, it would only have to be set back, it would only require a 10-foot setback, and it would have to be screened with a fence or a thick hedge, and we've got both, with a height of not less than 6.5 feet. The current arbor vitae hedge is between 7.5 and 8 feet high. It will grow very quickly, and we have evidence there on how long it will take before it fills out, and the view of the place set will be totally hidden. Now, we then have that little sting in the tail of 3108A4B3, and that is that no recreational structure shall be sited within any front yard as defined in section 3103 of this chapter. And if we could go to the next one, please, Mr. Taft, we will see what a recreational structure is. I'm going through this, Mr. Chairman, because I think it's very important to have all of this on the record. We have had arguments about whether or not this is in a front yard, or rather, it is claimed that we have illegally put a recreational structure in the front yard, and as I said, we didn't have much choice. But at any rate, a structure is an assembly of materials forming any construction framed of component structural parts for occupancy or use. So basically anything can be a structure. It's very broad. Recreational isn't specifically defined, so if we go to according to the code, words have to be construed in the manner they're normally used. Here we go to Merriam-Webster. It's relating to something done for fun and relaxation. So here we have the recreational structure. Now, I should just say by way of comment here that it is so broadly defined that in terms of a code, an assembly of materials, that would include a basketball hoop. So basically, the code says you can't put a basketball hoop in any front yard. Many people here, every second home has a basketball hoop located in what is technically a front yard. Now, what is a front yard? We can go on to the next slide, please. And this is a front yard. This is what you asked earlier, very pertinently. A front yard, front. You have to look around in the definitional section. You have to jump around a bit because you have to look at yard first, and then you see front. An unoccupied ground area between the front lot line and any building measured perpendicularly to the building at the closest point to the front lot line. And basically, so a front yard is the area between the front lot line and any building, but you then go to what a lot line is. There's another section there which you don't need to really worry about at this stage. A front lot line is the lot line separating a lot from a street right-of-way. If you've got 3 streets around you, as we have got 3 front yards. And that's going to be important to this consideration, to your assessment in this case. I now go on, please, to the next slide, which is to explain, again for the benefit of the public. You will be very used to this, but many people who don't understand the workings of a zoning board are not really very clear about what its job is. If you go back to the history of the mission of the ZBA, variances are the safety valve that keeps zoning from being unconstitutional. As long as we have had zoning in this country, we have had a machinery for variance. And this is basically, it's the constitutional role, and your function is to mediate between the strict letter of the law and justice in a particular case at hand. It should also be made clear that the zoning board is not, the zoning board of appeal is not the zoning police. You are not there to enforce the code. You are there with that function that is to decide then. Some people do not understand that. I'll be very quickly describe the difference between an area variance and a use variance because they are now very different. Up to about 30 years ago, there was no really clear distinction made in the law between area variances and use variances, and both were pretty difficult to get, and the courts tended to mix them up, and every village or town or city would have its own rules for giving variances. Now, this reached a situation in about 1992 and 93 that there was a fundamental change in the legislation. I'll come on to that in a second. But basically, an area variance, as opposed to a use variance, an area variance assumes that the use in question is permitted under the code, and a place set is a permitted use under the code. An area variance is an authorization for the use of land in a manner not allowed by the dimensional or physical requirements of the applicable zoning regulations. Most of the cases where you have been discussing area variances will probably be where somebody wants to encroach on the setback. This is perhaps an unusual one. You're dealing here with a recreational structure and a play set, and I think that the last time in which this board had to consider granting an area variance was back in 2000 and I think quite a long time, about 2005, where St. Joseph's School wanted to put their play equipment by the church. There were objections apparently, and so they had to move it to Craft Avenue, right next to the church. And that is the last example I've been able to find, I think it was 2005, of this board considering a variance. So in a way, this is a new case, but the principles are the same. It's common ground here that we should be applying for an area variance, and I believe that that is not in dispute here. Can we turn to the next one? As I've said, area variances, there was a major law change in 1992-93, starting off with cities and then towns and then the villages. Nowadays, instead of this patchwork of various rules from village to village, town to town, there's one uniform statewide test, and that test is a very different one from the use variance. As I said before, they often tended to be run into one another, and the courts had to create a case law to distinguish the two, and it got more and more confusing because a court in one part of New York State would say one thing, and a court in another part of New York State would say something very different. Now, one of the objectives, and this is important too, one of the objectives of the legislative change was to make area variances easier to obtain. Use, as opposed to a use variance, which is still very difficult to obtain, even though the machinery applies, the mechanism is totally different. There used to be an initial burden of proof on the applicant, whether it was an area variance or a use variance. There used to be a burden of proof placed on the applicant to prove their case. Now that has been changed, and instead of the burden of proof being on the applicant, there is a pure balancing of equities test which is imposed, which the board applies. And there we are. The overriding test is the zoning board has to weigh, on the one hand, the benefit to the applicant if the variance is granted against any detriment to the health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood or the community. Can we go on to the next one? And then there are the 5 factors. This board, I know, is very... can you go to the next one, please, Mr. Taft? Thank you very much. The 5 factors. You've always been very keen on asking people to make their presentation or their argument in terms of the 5 factors. That is absolutely right, and that's how it should be, but sometimes people lose sight of the fact that the 5 factors are not intended as a set of tests in their own. They are there as part of the overall balancing test of weighing up the equities. Now, I don't need to go into those. You know all those very well. But I will now, if I may, hand over the presentation to Ms. Ashley Lai, who is a certified planner and the vice president of one of the largest consultancies, zoning and environmental consultancies in New York. And so I will ask her, please, to deal with the 5 factors from the perspective of a zoning expert. So if I may do that now, please.
Hi, I'm Ashley Lai. I'm a certified planner and vice president at AKRF in White Plains. We prepared an analysis of the play set, reviewing it against the 5 factors that the ZBA must consider, and that analysis was submitted to your board. And I would just like to go over the main points that were included in that analysis. First, when considering an area variance, the ZBA must conduct a balancing test. The balancing test weighs the benefits of the area variance to the applicant against the potential detriment to the health, safety, and general welfare of the community or neighborhood. The ZBA does not need to reach a conclusion of no impact. However, I would like to point out that as an area variance for an accessory residential structure, this is a Type 2 action under the State Environmental Quality Review Act, and therefore does not have the potential to result in a significant adverse impact. Lastly, the balancing test considers 5 factors, which I will now walk through. Next slide, please. The grant of the area variance will not produce an undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood or detriment to nearby properties. Most importantly, the play set is a permitted use and typical of the neighborhood. These photos show examples of a sampling of play sets within the neighborhood that are located in areas where they are visible from the street. So you could see all these photos were taken from the street. Here's one play set, here's another play set, and here's another play set. Due to the unique layout of the lot, which has 3 front yards, this is the only viable location for the play set. The applicant has added 28 arborvitae trees to screen the play set and had painted it green to minimize its visibility from public vantage points. Arborvitae are a fast-growing species of tree and will likely fully obscure the play set in approximately 2 years. A really important thing to consider when you're considering aesthetic and character impacts is that the views from private homes are not protected. You must consider the views from public viewpoints. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation has issued guidance, it's called Program Policy DEP 00-2, to assist in the review of visual impacts. Pursuant to DEC guidance, an aesthetic impact occurs when there's a detrimental effect on the perceived beauty of a place or structure. Visual impact occurs when the mitigating effects of perspective do not reduce the visibility of an object to insignificant levels. As you've seen in all these photos, you can barely see it from the street given the new arborvitae and the painting of the structure. Thus, while the project may be visible from a certain location, mere visibility is not a threshold of significance. Per DEC's guidance, significance is determined based on the extent to which the visibility interferes with the public's enjoyment or appreciation of a resource from public viewpoints. Under DEC's guidance, the play structure does not result in an aesthetic impact or visual impact because the current landscaping mostly shields the play structure from public view. Next slide, please. The benefit sought by the applicant cannot be achieved by a method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than an area variance. As you can see on this slide, the property is uniquely shaped with 3 front yards and no side yard. So these are the 3, 1 street, 2 street, 3 street, and this is the small rear yard. The property has areas of steep slopes, rock outcroppings, and mature trees that greatly limit the potential locations of the play set. The only flat and open lawn area is where the play set was placed. There is no viable location that would be considered the rear yard under the zoning, and that location would likely place it closer to the neighbors, as you can see on this slide. This is the neighbor's house right here. If it were to be placed in the backyard, which would be very difficult given the topography, it would actually be closer to neighbors than it is in its current location here. Lastly, because the play set is located at the base of the slope, it is less visible than if it were to be located at a higher elevation closer to the house. Because it's at a low point here, if it were to be placed up closer to the house, it would actually be more likely to be visible from the street because it would be higher up, it would be harder to shield with the fence and the arborvitae. Next slide, please. The requested area variance is not substantial. The playset is a very common accessory residential structure typical of a suburban neighborhood. The location of the structure meets the minimum 10-foot property line setback and screening requirements of Section 310-8A4B3 of the Village's zoning code regarding residential recreational structures. In other words, the only reason that this is not compliant is that the lot has 3 front yards. Oftentimes, zoning codes enable the code enforcement officer to designate one of the front yards as a rear or side yard in situations such as this, but Bronxville's code does not have that provision. Lastly, the structure is very small and occupies only 3% of the front yard. As such, the area variance is minor and the minimum required to allow the playset to remain.
Could I ask a couple questions just on the dimensions of the playset? What's the height and what's the width?
It's 18 feet by 17 feet by
Wait, but what's 18 feet? Is that the height?
the 18 feet is the length,
Right,
by 17 feet is the depth, and 11.5 feet is the height.
okay. And was it purchased as a generic playset, or was it specially built, or how did you come about with a playset like that?
It is a Playground 1 Turbo Fort Hangout, sold by New NJ Swing Sets, and it comes, someone has to come there and assemble it, and it's made out of western red cedar, and someone comes and assembles it, and then they seal it.
If I might, thank you. If I might refer you to the application that was made when you have which was by accident shown up first. This is all dealt with. The dimensions are dealt with in the application that was filed. And
Right.
if you have questions there, I think you will see there the details of the play set, the manufacturer, and so on, and its construction.
Right.
Wait a second. The question though, was it customized or was it generic?
Oh, it was not customized. It comes that it was a specific type that's offered, but it still had to be constructed
All right, well,
on
thank you
site.
for answering the question.
Yes.
Next slide, please. The grant of the area variance will not have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district. As I mentioned earlier, this is a type 2 action under seeker, meaning that there is no potential for environmental impact. The play set was specifically cited to avoid impacts to natural features such as mature trees, steep slopes, and rock outcrops. Creating a flat area on another portion of the site would potentially involve blasting, rock chipping, tree removal, or the import of fill, all of which would be much more invasive to the natural landscape than using the current flat open lawn location. The current lawn location has limited habitat value and enables the preservation of the environmental features of the site. Lastly, the site is not located in a historic district, nor is the property substantially contiguous to a site listed on the state or national register of historic places. Therefore, the play set will not have an adverse effect on the physical or environmental conditions of the site, neighborhood, or district. Next slide, please. No, this is it. The applicant's difficulty is caused by the physical configuration of the lot and was not self-created. The issue at hand is that the property has 3 front yards, and the zoning code does not have a provision to address that. The play structure is located on the only suitable area on the property. Any other location would be more visible and more disruptive to the neighborhood to install. All efforts have been made to minimize its visibility. The applicant has installed 28 trees and painted the structure so it blends better with its surroundings. For all of these reasons, the variance that is being requested is the minimum variance necessary to permit the playset to remain on the property. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we go to the next slide, please? I'm returning. I will now look at those I can see that you are looking at your watches. I hope you don't think I'm going on too long, but this has caused quite a lot of controversy in the neighborhood for something as small as this. And I think it's important that the people who are objecting understand what the code says and what your role is. Now, the role of the 5 factors, I'm looking at them here from the point of view of a lawyer. You're very familiar with these, and so I'd just ask you to accept these as part of the record, but I just wanted to skim through them very quickly. The 5 factors are not in themselves the test. They are subordinate to and part of the overall balancing test, which is basically your main mandate. Within the rest of it, you'll be very familiar with these. They're not box-ticking exercise. You're not keeping a score. But one thing that is important is that you can decide at a local level. You've got a lot of discretion to decide what weight you will attach to each of these factors. But I think it's worth recalling that the standards are exclusive, and you are not entitled to take into account other matters which are not enumerated in the statute. And I refer there to the leading case of Caspian Realty in the appellate division. Now, once again, we go back to what is the basic inquiry, and again, the leading case of Desena. The basic inquiry at all times is whether the strict application of the code in a given case will serve a valid public or community purpose that outweighs the benefit to the property owner. So if I may move on to the next one, thank you very much. You have a broad discretion, but it does have its legal limits. And courts allow you broad discretion in considering variances, but you can't, and of course we know you can't, the courts cannot substitute their judgment for the judgment you show, just because they think, well, I'd have decided this differently. That's not the role of the courts. On the other hand, a decision will be overturned because you are a quasi-judicial body and a quasi-legislative body. A decision will be overturned if it's arbitrary, capricious, or irrational, or you acted illegally, or you abused discretion, or the decision is not supported by the evidence on the record. And it's important, a lot of the case law states, and makes it very clear, that if a board merely succumbs to generalized community pressure, there is and fails to take into account the other factors in the balancing test, then in all likelihood, its decision will be reversed in very short order by the courts. Can I go on to the next one? Generally, and so I'd like to deal here with generalized and conclusory community pressure, because we say that this is what we are seeing here. Some judgments expressly hold that succumbing to generalized and conclusory community opposition automatically makes the decision irrational. That's what the court says. It wasn't rational for you to, I say you, but a board, I'm sure your board won't do this. And generally, boards may not act on conclusory statements or generalized objections without supporting facts. So mere opinions or expression or even uproar is not a valid factor to take into account when you are conducting the balancing exercise. No, not yet. Okay. So basically, it's important to note that a board that discounts expert testimony, and you've heard testimony from an expert, a certified planner expert, they cannot discount expert testimony in the record in favor of conclusory opinions from neighbors that the character of the neighborhood will be detrimentally changed, unsupported by empirical data or expert evidence. They will be overturned by the court, and those are the authorities. I'm sure the village attorney will confirm that to you. Now, what is conclusory is a word that lawyers tend to use, and it's not one that you use every day in ordinary discourse, which is why I would say you know conclusory, generalized conclusory community pressure when you see it. And I refer to the, would you show up the next slide, please? And this is an email which came from Mr. Harris on Monday, May the 2nd, sent to Mr. Taft. And there he talks about, I'm reaching out to see what the status is on the Homeowners Code violations. I'd appreciate any information regarding their intentions. I don't believe that Mr. Harris was ever lodged a formal complaint. We were not even told who had complained, and there is a form on which you are required to complain, and that form says on the bottom, unless you sign it and give your name and address, the board, the zoning enforcement officer, the village, will not act upon your complaint. Now, the next line is the one which is most.
Can I just ask a
Yes,
question?
please.
Are you planning to go through all these slides? Because what we would really like to do is open it up to discussion with the
I mean,
public.
if you want to take it as read,
Right.
this is on the record. I would like to enter this is on the record, as I said there.
Okay.
A place that's expressly a permitted use. Maybe we're going over old ground, but I did want this to be on the record because we have to have it on the record in order for the decision to be basically taken into account, carry out the balancing exercise. But if you wish, I could just skim through it. But can we just go back to that other one? Talking about conclusory statements. Obviously, we and all of our neighbors would oppose any variance or mitigation efforts. That rather undercuts the whole idea of a balanced view. If you're against mitigation efforts, then your mind is not open to all the measures that owners can take in order to ensure that they are causing the minimum amount of offense to neighbors. So if I could go on to the next one. A place that's expressly a permitted use, we've had that. And then basically I think it's worth pointing out that as the court says, neighborhood character impacts are rare. And the Court of Appeals of New York, our top court, aptly observed in a case of Wilcox against our neighbors in Yonkers, that generally speaking, an area variance involves no change in the essential character of the zoning districts. If you wish, to take this as read, I can pretty well leave it there. I was going to refute some of the arguments that have been made, but these are there.
Yeah, and I think we've all had a chance to review this material because this was sent to us earlier.
Yeah, but these were put, thank you, Mr. Chairman, these are in submissions that were made to the city, which are on the record and published on the website.
Absolutely.
And so if we want to, in the interests of economy of time, I am, of course, totally ready to skip to the end, and if the other...
Sure, well, yeah, we would appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Some questions.
But I should
I'm
just
sorry.
say-
No, let him.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Okay. Now, thank you. So let me ask my, we'll want to hear from the public, but any questions
Yeah.
before we turn to the public?
Yeah, I just wanted a context of what the family situation is. Obviously, you probably have a child if they want to play in the play set, and what's the age and that sort of thing, and yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. I am the grandfather of the two children in question. One is aged 2 and really enjoys the play set, and the other is aged 5 months.
Okay.
So they are both very young children.
And is there any medical condition that makes this playset necessary? Is there any circumstance other than?
Sorry, with all due respect, you don't need a medical condition for a playset to be of use. It's acknowledged.
I'm just asking a question.
No, sorry, but I
don't need a
understand why
lecture.
you asked.
I just asked the question,
They are
yes
both,
or no?
I'm glad to say they're both perfectly healthy.
Okay,
They get
that's
a
all I
great deal
wanted
of
to hear.
enjoyment
Thank
out
you.
of the playset. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't quite catch the end of that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, let's open it up to the public, and please, introduce yourself and speak into the microphone.
Hi, I'm Dave Harris, 24 Avon Road. My wife Fran is here. First, I'd like to congratulate you on becoming a U.S. citizen. Congratulations on that. This is my second time before the zoning board, first time speaking. It's always difficult to follow an English barrister in any court, but particularly here. I'm just a humble homeowner who was surprised when we saw the orange fence going up and then the swing set, and we did send an email to the village. I'd first like to clear up one thing, which is the picture that was shown was not from our attic, but was from a second floor gym that we use quite often. This is a picture here from our front porch, which was taken today. That's from our front porch. I'd just like the committee to see that. Zoning board to see. This is standing on our porch. So this is,
Right.
Excuse me, may I ask, please, was that taken with a zoom lens?
it was zoomed in, yes.
Was
But
zoomed in.
my eyes zoomed in. I can zoom in on this painting. I can see it clearly. I wasn't going to note, but I will note, I'm not sure if it matters whether the photo was taken from the third floor, the second floor, or the first floor. We can see the swing set pretty clearly from any room in our house, and in particular from our front lawn. I think when you look at this application, one of the problems is right from the start, they present a photoshopped image of what the structure will be hidden by at some point, which I think, you know, who knows whether those trees are going to grow. It's not just a swing set, it's in fact in their own writing here, they call it a Playground 1 Turbo Original Fort Hangout. So it's a lot. I think I wrote a long letter. I took a long time trying to summarize the various points, both from an individual homeowner living across the street as well as from the town. And I think I'm not going to go through it in detail because it's an 8-page letter. I appreciate you reading it. The two facets I guess I'd focus on is one as a homeowner looking at it as well as from the point of view of if I go to sell my property, whether people like that or not, it doesn't really matter in terms of if one buyer is lost, it could affect the value of my house. There's clearly benefit to the owner of One Governors by changing whether it's a use variance or a whatever variance it is, allowing them to put a swing set in the front property probably increases the value of their property and probably is detrimental to our property. There's a transitional nature of benefits to the children, but as we all know, swing sets are used for a while, but often are not used and are left there for years and years to clutter up the neighborhood. This one's obviously well-built. It's very tall. It's larger than most of the swing sets in the neighborhood that are there. I'll get to that in a second. A couple of the other points. They obviously liked the house when they bought it, whether it has 3 front yards or not. My property is a great property. It's very nice. It has a lot of parking and access and whatnot, but we're limited as well. We have, I guess, 3 front yards as well, and we knew it when we bought it, as they did, and it comes with those limitations. Whether they knew the zoning codes when they purchased the house or not, I think is irrelevant. Trees may grow, but they may not. They can also be ruined if a future homeowner comes along and the trees are ruined by snow or ice and doesn't want to replace them or can't afford to replace them. We're left looking at a fence, which is right now I think still solid. I'm not sure if that's permitted or not. The swing set is very close to my property, and I think an important aspect from our point of view is our house sits well below One Governors. I actually have to look up from all my front windows. The swing set is higher than my front windows. When they stand on their decks and look out, they look out over my house and don't even see the swing set. So it puts more onus on us to look at the swing set. They have incredibly nice vistas from their home. I think there's really no more clear-cut case of a zoning violation. Both the size and structure of the playset, the proximity to the road, as well as the distance of the structure from the dwelling unit. I think the zoning board is going to have its hands full in terms of future cases, and it's going to be difficult to stop a proliferation of swing sets across the town. When I walk around with my dog, which I do often, and now that I'm more observant of it, I look at so many homes that don't have backyards, and I think what would it look like if you had play sets in all of those yards. I think it would be a real precedent. A couple more points here. The applicant has said there's not many complaints. Obviously, we did complain, and there were other complaints. The applicant claims there are other swing sets in other front yards, but to be honest, most of them are much smaller than this swing set, including the one on Plateau Circle West, which was recently constructed. It's shielded by a very invisible see-through fence with some good shrubbery, and it's not nearly as obstructive as this swing set. I think the right course of action in that case is if there are illegal swing sets out there, we should probably ask those homeowners to remove them and not approve this one based on a bunch of illegal swing sets, which I think would create bad precedent. Painting it green fixes everything, I say in my letter. It clearly doesn't. Once winter comes and trees begin to shrink a little bit, and if there's snowfall or ice, they get lower, and bright green shows up pretty well when there's a lot of snow covering it. I'm very familiar with One Governor's. I think there are other locations for the swing set that would be more accessible for the children. There may have to be rock removal to make it smooth or level. But my neighbor at Plateau Circle West did that a few years ago, where they blasted out a bunch of rock to create a very level front yard that's very usable. I said before that this was my second time before the zoning board. The first time was right after we bought our home. Our next door neighbor applied for a building permit for the garage and was turned down. And they came over and said, well, look, we're looking at doing a garage and we need a variance to make it closer to your property by about 3 or 4 feet. And they showed it to us, and I said, that doesn't look great. And they ended up modifying it. They took away some windows that were facing our property. And ultimately, the first time it came to the zoning board was to support their application for that variance. So I'm not an unreasonable person. We just were not given the opportunity beforehand to have any input into this project. And like I said, it's tough to follow a barrister. I'm just a humble homeowner who's here for the second time. I would say that so many decisions today are made on emotional, anecdotal basis, and I think, you know, when you're sort of clear-eyed fact-based, you sometimes are viewed as harsh or, you know, not sympathetic to children, but we are. We've been here in the area for 30 years, and in this house for 22 years, have raised kids, have paid taxes in the village for the last 10 years with no children. And have children in the area, and I hope we're going to be here for a long time. I think the zoning board needs to be fact-based and clear-eyed here and not approving this variance. Thank you for the time.
Great, thank you, David. I have a question. I'm going to ask Paul you this question, because this is something that David, a point he raised, and that is the maintenance of that hedge, arborvitae hedge, as well as other plantings. If a variance is provided, does that mean that the current owner, future owners are required to maintain that planting and maintain the play set? I mean, think of the scenario, ice storm hits Bronxville. Those things could come down, right? So,
well, you know, the approval of a play set is based on having some buffer for the neighbors, so ordinarily it would be required. Certainly, if the board felt they wanted to provide, you know, a stipulation that this needs to be maintained, that may help to enforce that in the future.
okay.
I had a second question, Paul, while you're up there. So, and I'm not sure whether this is still true, on the sides, it was a see-through fence, 50%, but in the front yard facing Avon, it was a opaque fence, which I think is required if the playset were in the back or whatever. And so is that still out of code in terms of the fence before the trees, or after, or between the trees and the playset?
Yes, when I was made aware of the new playset and the fence, I visited the site, spoke with the owner. He understood that the playset would most likely need a variance. He needed a little time to figure out what he wanted to do. And then the fence, we did have a discussion about the fence, that if he were to remove the solid panels and put in the half-solid panels, that he has some of those there already, that would not require variance. During that discussion, he indicated that most likely that's what he would do. He has submitted an application for the fence, but I need to get more information from him, so I'm working with him to he'll need to make a decision whether to just go half-solid and then we can move on, or if he wants to leave those in place, he would be required to get a variance and come back before the board.
So I guess I asked the homeowner or the representative or the grandfather what the intention was, or why are we not going for 2 variances today?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that. I'm obliged if you would...
Well, the front fence facing Avon, I think, is still solid, opaque, right, in violation of the code. And the question is, we have a playset that's in violation of the code and a fence that's in violation of the code. Why are we not addressing both today?
Well, I don't know. Mr. Edsel put in an application for the fence, and he was advised that once he got the permit, then he should replace it with the solid fence with a half-solid. The solid fence is only the front part.
Right.
All the other fences around the side are actually totally code compliant. But he put in an application for a variance on what date? 6 months ago? Same time as for the playset, and nothing has been heard since. So basically, the application for the variance for the fence is sitting in the building office, and the building inspector said you don't need to change it until your permit goes through, and then you should make it. You can alter it, but don't do anything yet because we want to see what happens with the place set. And so we are basically waiting on the planning, on the building department. We have an application in that went in 6 months ago and haven't heard anything back. But with regard to your other question, we would, of course, accept and have proposed already any reasonable condition in terms of removing it after 15 years, which is probably the natural life of a place set anyway of this nature, and also, of course, to maintain it. The stipulation would run with the land, so any future owner would be bound by it. So
just so we're clear on this, is the intent of the applicant to keep the solid fence or change it to make it within code?
Yep.
To change it, correct?
It's to change it. As soon as he gets the permit through, because he put in a permit, he said, put in a permit for the changed fence. He did that, and we're still waiting to hear. And we were advised by the building department, look, you don't need to take it down until I've dealt with your permit.
Okay.
So we're still waiting. But you cannot see the fence anyway. But,
Understood.
you know, but there, I should say there is no application before you today for a variation of a rejection of a permit for the fence, because we have not had a rejection. It's still in limbo.
The intention is to make the fence code compliant.
Yeah.
They are seeking a building permit to make it a code-compliant fence. Once they receive the permit, they will fix the fence.
Got it.
So there's no need for.
Okay, good. You've answered the question. Thank you. Okay, other members of the public like to speak?
Hi, my name is Mark Davis. I'll try and be brief, although I'm not really sure where to start. But I think a good place to start is there are a number of statements in the variance application which are stated as fact. For example, the fence is 100% code compliant. It's not true. It just simply is not true. There's also numerous statements in there that no one can see the play structure from the road. That's also not true. I'll leave it up to Mr. Taft and the building department to figure out which play structures are in front yards, but I think that several of these, at least the ones that I saw, I think there's maybe one or perhaps two that are in front yards. The other ones may not be proper because of setback and other issues. But part of this is nobody objects to play structure, swing sets, play sets. We've all raised families in this village. And this whole argument is trying to be set up that, somehow we object to play sets. What we object to is a play set in a front yard, just like I would object to someone having a garden shed in their front yard. So this is not a bunch of mean, old, cranky people not letting, little kids play. I'm not sure if there's other parts on the property that would support a play structure, but Sagamore Park Playground is less than 900 feet away from One Governor's Road. So I think that there's plenty of alternatives. I'll also leave it up to the zoning board in terms of the 3 front yard issue, but at least my reading, and I'm certainly not an attorney nor am I an architect, but there is a definition of lot line principal front which applies when it's a corner lot. And at least when I read through those definitions, it seems pretty clear that the front lot line is on Avon. And then once you define the front lot line, then it does appear that then the rear lot line and the side lot lines are then, fall out of that definition. But I think it's just really a matter of reading through this and separating fact from fiction, because there is a fair amount of fiction in the applicant's submissions that he appears to want everyone to believe is fact. And what they filed earlier today, the, appendix to their zoning board application, there's numerous places where in quotes, there's quotes like, neighbors don't want play sets, or I can't remember exactly what it is. No one has ever said that. So I'm not sure where these quotes are coming that they are rebutting, but it just simply is not true. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Irene McNamara, and I live diagonally from the Etzels. We actually, Robert and Caitlin and I actually had a very, what I thought was productive and friendly conversation at my front door. And what I expressed to Robert then, which is exactly the same way I feel now, is sorry, I feel like I want to direct you, but it's sort of unfortunate the way this all went, because if you had known that there needed to be conversation and you needed to apply, then the neighbors might have all had a conversation with the Etzels, and we might not be standing here talking to you guys today. What happened is, unfortunately, some of the choices that were made, I think what it created was a egregiously jarring situation on that property. Not because they wanted to have a play set, not because they put a fence up, but because the things that they chose created such a majorly different feeling to the neighborhood and to that property and to all of us living around them that we were stunned, literally. And I want to show you, Robert, I'll show you this. This is before they put up the trees, but this is what we saw for several months.
Right.
this is driving down Avon Road.
Mhm.
So the conversation that the expert said about not being public space, this was from my house on the corner. This is from our house. And this is the place that juxtaposed that in here, because I never had a picture where it's in the air. Excuse me, I don't like. For us, I think the issue is, this is also very important. I should have said this when I was up near you. This is during the fall and winter. And you can see, maybe you can't see from here, but the trees remarkably become very, very bare. And so on the side lots, and even from the front, I think we're going to see a heck of a lot more than you're seeing in these pictures you saw today. It's going to be a different look. I feel that the ability to be sure that even if we go with the plantings that are there now, the ability to be sure that somebody's going to police those plantings, that we are never going to be able to see that play set, is just too tenuous. It's just, you can't guarantee that. And this, driving down the road every day, this is unacceptable to me as a homeowner. It was just too big a change. It's too big, it's too orange, it's too much. It's 3 sides large fencing. It's huge. I think we don't want your kids not to play. We want your children to have a good time. We are friendly neighbors. But this was hard for us and still is. Thank you.
Anyone else? Oh, okay,
My name is David Pasquale. I live on 51 Avon Road.
okay.
We've been in town for, I think, 25 years. Kids were born in town, everything. I've lived at Avon for, I guess, since 2009 now. And I don't even know the Edsels, but someone sent me a link today. I read it and was so embarrassed and saddened that, you know, I don't know any of these people talking about that they're mean old people, they don't want kids to play. I mean, it is what it is. It's a play set that we're trying to get them to take down. I went by the house. They're evergreen trees. They're called evergreens because they're evergreen. The winter doesn't matter. They're not going to get thin. They're evergreens. They're huge. They're arborvitaes, I believe. I'm not a horticulturist. Also, so there's no blow-up dolls for any seasons. Every other place I go, they have huge festive ones, Halloween. Imagine like a Frankenstein or Christmas. My wife thought it was crazy. Is it off? Am I off?
Oop.
Don't stand so close to it. I'll turn it up if you stand back.
So I don't know if you need a variance, but there's none in town. And so I bought them. I bought a huge Frankenstein, which probably drives some people, I mean, like, it's crazy, because I didn't know I needed a variance. But I got Frankenstein, and then I got a pumpkin to put next to it, and I got a pumpkin one with horses. And then, because my kids, they love them. So then at Christmas, I got a huge Santa, and, well, it's Christmas, so I got a snowman to put with it too. No variance. It's in my front lawn, though. And my wife said, you can't do this in Bronxville, because it's going to look tacky. And the people, they're not going to like it, and then we come pop them. But my kids like them, so I have it. We also have an odd lot. We're up on a hill there. We did put a swing set, and they call the swing sets, they give them names, like they said. They give them names so that they can charge more. If they just said it's like Bob's generic swing set, then you got to pay $1,000. What they bought, because I bought one like that as well, they cost like, you know, $8,000 to $15,000. And they come put them in, they paint them, you got to pay another $1,000 each year to get it sealed, because Bronxville has these huge bees that come and they burrow into the wood. And so you have to do that every year. So they're not going to put it in the yard, because everyone I know in town who has these things, you just do it. You have to seal it and upkeep it. And they're not going to buy this, in terms of the coverage around the play set, it's not something you just let go, because otherwise it would be unsafe. And again, so I don't know these people. I'm embarrassed for the town. I wish that this much effort was, and I sent a letter in, I wish this much effort was put into the sidewalks. I got hit on Sagamore running. My kids can't walk. It took me 2 years to get a crosswalk permitted on Avon and Park my son is autistic, he can't walk across the street, the town could put in a sign that says autistic child at its discretion under the state laws. They will not do this, will not do this. Jim Palmer, for some reason, it's his decision, will not do this. But there's a survey that went out about parking and walking in town. I think it said something like 75% of the people have almost been hit. And we're supposed to send our kids to school. So I would love this much uproar to just fix the sidewalks. And if there's code, which there is, for people's sidewalks, when you're driving around policing the play sets in the front lawns, flag the people. And then while you're at it also, at winter, there's another ordinance.
I hate to interrupt.
Sidewalks. I love that. Thank you.
No, I hate to interrupt you, but the zoning board has nothing to do with sidewalks. Or enforcement.
I just, again,
Okay,
I saw this
good.
and I thought, and just also the one point someone said about I saw online about the value of the homes. When Bronxville gets on Fox 5 because we made someone tear down a beautiful swing set, when you try to sell your house and people see that, chances are that's going to have a pretty negative value. And I love that, it's nice. Kids want to go play. And also the point about Sagamore, because I have young kids, sending them up to Sagamore Road to the play set or to the school, to the playground. The school playground was decrepit until like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when we just paid to rebuild it. And that would have done you no good during COVID because they were all shut down. So you needed it in your front lawn to use it. So it's not a solution, unfortunately. And these are young kids and they have to plan that it's coming back, obviously.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, anyone else? Oh, okay.
I'm certainly not ashamed of Bronxville at all. In fact, I want to thank everybody for doing what you're doing because you're basically protecting everyone. And the big concern that I have is setting a precedent that someone can put a play structure, which is not allowed in their front yard, put a fence, which is also not compliant with the code, in their front yard, and then just simply screen it off with bushes and say, no problem here, folks, everybody move on. And once that precedent is set, I'm certainly not saying that everyone's going to have play sets in the front yard, but it wouldn't take but one or two people that have play sets or garden sheds or whatever in their front yard, screen it off with a hedge, and I think it will change the character and how the village feels. Thank you.
I am a homeowner in 2 Beech Tree Lane. It's a corner property too, a 3 front yard property. It's my second time in the zoning board. The first time was to request a variance, which I requested following all the permits. I just feel that Bronxville is a town that they listen to you, the neighbors listen to you, and I'm also work as an architect in the practice of my husband, Richard Gonzalez. It's a town that they listen. Neighbors listen to you. You don't have to come to the zoning board to get your point through. If you're coming to the zoning board to get your point through, we're 2 steps back. This should have been done with an architect, with the neighbors, chose a structure that they could be at least allowed, not in the second round. This should have been done at a lower level, not a decision to the zoning board. The fence was hideous the first moment I saw it. I've been to Chicago, every single Frank Lloyd Wright house in the United States, in Pittsburgh, in Buffalo, and it's one of my favorite home properties in Bronx. Congratulations. My thought is, if we have this beautiful town, we have to accept the rules. I accepted the rules when I purchased a corner property, 2 Beech Tree Lane, very hard. Paul Taft knows about it. But we are working with the other neighbors to try to solve many problems that we have in our street, in our park. So this is just as a reference. There's no need for the zoning board if you don't talk to your neighbors first. Thank you.
And your name, please?
Yeah, excuse me, what was your name again? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, any other, we have another. Okay.
Hi, my name's Nancy Davis. I live at 24 Ridge Road. I have 2 things, maybe it's more than 2. First is, if the Edsels and Mr. Edsel's father, grandfather, whatever, if they want things on the record, fine. But again, I have a big problem with things being submitted that are absolutely false. Like I don't know if, whatever. It started with the application and it continued today with this new piece of, the complaints say this, or they say that. Nowhere do they say that. We are absolutely not against play sets. We love children, I bet everyone here does, but, throughout this whole application process when nobody was consulted, it's innuendo. The retirement community, they don't like kids, they don't like the sound of kids, whatever. So forget that, it doesn't matter. But again, if we're putting things on the record, shouldn't things be true? That's number one. Number two, in terms of a play set, we all have limitations to our property. We went through this exercise when we moved into town, whatever. I'm not saying, we're great because we didn't put one in, or they're bad because they tried to. We understand what's driving them wanting to do this. However, there are a lot of ways to let your kids, if you don't want to go to the playground, get a few smaller pieces of equipment and put them in your yard. You have a beautiful yard, but there are places that you can put, a slide or whatever. We have neighbors that did the same thing. They have 3 young kids. Did they put a play set in their front yard? No, because it's against code. Did they put one other places? No, but they found a way to make their property work and give the kids the benefit they were looking for. So I'll leave it at that. Appreciate your time, and I do know you put a lot of time into this, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, let me ask my fellow members here, any other questions? Okay. All right, so let me propose a resolution. Yes.
You said I could have an opportunity to come back.
I thought you were finished.
No, I wasn't. You've virtually stopped me, I'm afraid. And I said, I wanted to have an opportunity to come back, and I had the impression that you said to me, if they make any points that you want to come back on, you will have the chance.
Well,
I think in all
okay.
fairness, I should have the last word.
Okay, but please no more slide presentations. If you'd like to have a final comment, please keep it brief. Okay?
Yes, indeed. Well,
Yes.
I would ask you, first of all, to look at all the filings which have been made and the arguments which are in there. They are part of the record, and I'm quite sure that you have looked at those very carefully. I'm quite sure that you have also looked at the tone of the comments which have been made by our neighbors. Unfortunately, nobody ever came to us and said we have concerns about it. The first thing we knew was when the building inspector turned up the day before my son-in-law's final architecture exams. It wasn't a great time, but he spent a lot of time talking to Mr. Taft's former assistant. But at any rate, I would ask you to look at the copies of the presentation that I have handed up, which are the ones I would have spoken to if we weren't also pressed for time. I think there are a few important points that need to be made in relation to a number of the conditions. One of which is the whether you can achieve the same objectives with a measure falling short of a variance. You don't require a variance. One of the suggestions that was made was that Mr. Edsel should dynamite his site so as to create a flat and level area, not in that yard, but on the side. I don't know what Mr. Taft would have had to say if we were dynamiting this beautiful site with nice rock. It would take an enormous amount of explosives. But leaving that aside, also they can go and play in the playground. Now that overlooks a couple of things, and that is that when the law says that when you are considering possible alternatives, you have to look at it from the point of view of the objects, of the goals of the applicant. And there's a famous case that everybody who works in this area knows of the people who wanted to put up a patio somewhere in Suffolk County. They want to put up a patio overlooking the harbor, beautiful view of the harbor, and the board said, no, you could put it on the back overlooking the street. And the court immediately overturned that on the basis that you weren't interested in looking on the street. If your objective in building a patio is to look on this beautiful harbor, then you had to look at it from that point of view. With regard to the precedent, I think this is a case that is going to turn on precedent. A lot of people don't understand very well what precedent means in terms of your mission. And let me just remind you that you should avoid the argument that's been made, and it's been made by everybody here. If you allow this, every house on Avon Road and even Bronxville will want to put one up. Do not fall for the fallacy of the judgmental slippery slope. If you make one judgment, you will rationally have to make another one, and so on and so forth. Now, precedent is important, but every case is different and may yield a different result. And we say the grant of the requested variance will not give the property owners carte blanche to put up play sets in every front yard of the village. The applicant has shown a very specific set of facts, which is very peculiar to that property. And I don't think there can be many lots in properties in Bronxville which present the same set of facts. Any future applicant would, in order for this to become the first in a wave of playset applications, any future applicant would have to, it's not going to happen. If this were to be a precedent, the board would have to consider, if somebody else wanted to put up a playset, the board would have to consider the facts and the circumstances of the particular case. And we know that even very slight differences between the facts presented by a case can be important for the board. In many cases, the board doesn't even have to make a distinction because it's clear from the record that the board can change its view. It can, and if it comes to what
No,
it looks
okay,
like.
well, I'm going to stop you there because we need to move on, and many of us have been on the zoning board for a number of years. We're very familiar with precedents, very sensitive to this issue. So thank you very much. Okay, so if there are no other questions from my fellow members here or comments, let me propose a resolution that the Zoning Board of Appeals grant to the resident of 1 Governor's Road a variance from Section 310-08, 310-3, no recreational structures shall be sited within any front yard. And such variance, if granted, should require the residents of 1 Governor's Road to maintain all landscaping surrounding the playset, including the arborvitae hedge along Avon Road. And in the event of any damage to such hedge, the resident shall restore the plantings to a minimum height of 8 feet. Furthermore, such structure shall be properly maintained, including the maintenance of its current color. Let me start with you, John. Your thoughts?
Okay, property is unique, and there is dealing with some steep slopes, and it is bound by 3 streets. I don't see the benefit sought by the applicant could have been achieved by any other way than this area variance. I also don't think that it's a undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood or that it causes a detriment to any nearby properties. I also don't find that it has an adverse effect or impact on the physical environment of the neighborhood. In short, I don't see a detriment to the health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood by granting this variance. However, I do couple this with my opinion that it should be coupled with that the hedges or the arborvitae be maintained at a minimum of 8 feet, as long as that swing set or the PlayStation is in existence, and that it maintained in the same situation that it is presently. If in the event that the arborvitae or the hedges do come down, they need to be replaced. Now, you had mentioned that you are also willing to put a time limit on the, what's the time limit that you use, 10 years?
The natural life is 15. I can't imagine when these children are age 17 that they're going to spend much time on the swing set. So, I mean, we would accept a reasonable period. Would 12 years be okay?
Well,
And then, of course, it would run with the land.
Yeah, that is that the lesser of the 12 years, or as long as the PlayStation is maintained with the screening of with a minimum of 8 feet.
And I think Mr. Edsel would also be quite willing to undertake to remove it, to remove the playset when it no longer serves a useful purpose for his children. So we're willing to accept any reasonable condition.
I'm going to add that to it.
Okay, so let me just be clear, John, we're talking about 12 years, is that?
Well, I'm saying that that's, 12 years would be the maximum.
Maximum.
However, if the arborvitae or the hedges are not maintained to a minimum of 8 feet, they would require the removal of the PlayStation.
Right. Right.
And if he wants to say that, also that when, at the time of the 12 years, that the PlayStation will be removed,
Right,
that's fine with me.
okay, okay. Okay, thank you. Mary Ellen?
I think the issue here is all about communication. In life, if people communicate, problems tend to not surface. This situation was done backwards. It was put up and then was asked to have a variance. That should never have happened. You should have, I understand sometimes when you move into a community, I happen to live on a house that has 3 street fronts, so I also know the issues that it can create, but I'm a rule follower. So I did and always asked what the questions that needed to be asked in order to do something. It sounds like that wasn't the case here. So we're asking for a variance post-structure being put up. I also spent countless hours today driving around town to see which properties, because Bronxville has a very unique topography, right? So not everyone has, even if you have a backyard, it might not be one that you could put a structure in just based on how it, you know, the rock formation, the trees, whatever it is, because of the hills. There were only 4 properties that I could identify that have a structure, a recreational structure in their front yard, of which I know the building department had reached out to at least 1 or 2 of, and they were amenable to making the necessary changes that were required. So, so I think going back to communication, I would hope in the future that that you communicate more clearly with your neighbors. I'm very torn as to whether I should approve it, because being a rule follower, I sort of feel that part of that is you didn't do things right, and it isn't actually, it's a big structure, and it is a big structure that has impacted the neighborhood in a way, not only from a physical presence, but also from an emotional standpoint too. So, I think if it looks completely different, I will have to say, when I drove by it a couple months ago, I was completely taken aback seeing it, and having driven by it a couple times over the past couple days, it looks much more settled into the environment. So I agree with John in terms of if you maintain the plantings, and if you are willing to take it down when it's no longer in use or needed, I think that would be a good plan, and I would then approve it.
Great. Thank you, Mary Ellen. Greg, your thoughts?
Yeah, I do think this was done backwards, but it is a unique house. Sometimes you find out things a little bit later. You know, when it first went up, I drive by that house almost every day, getting to my house, and I did notice the play structure. I'm like, that doesn't seem like it should be there. But I agree with my other board members that it has grown in, and it's harder to see the play structure. And I agree with setting a time limit to removal. So in that case, I'm more inclined to acquiesce then.
Thanks, Greg. Marty?
I would agree with my other comments about just process in this community. That's I think it's very unfortunate that we had this meeting in this context and with these discussions. I guess I would turn it down. I think, as I think about this, I try to figure out, is there a better way to satisfy the need of your children? And I appreciate the fact that this state's very young, but I find the place set to be substantial. You know, frankly, it's a little scary to have an 11.5-foot high play set for a 2-year-old, so be careful there. But I view it as substantial. I think that the need for your children's enjoyment and playing, as a grandparent, I take our kids down to the school. I think you got Sagamore as well. It's a great way for them to meet other kids as opposed to in an isolated setting. The reason I asked the medical question was I was trying to figure out whether there was a particular need for the play set on the property that you needed to observe, and you know, the child had some sort of difficulties. So I was trying to be sensitive in case there was a unique circumstance. I don't see a unique circumstance here. Obviously, you've got, I think the community has some mending to do here. And I would also add that I guess I would suggest that if there is a variance, that the front fence get fixed, you know, that it conforms with zoning code, so we don't come back here and have another fun session of an hour and a half talking about a fence as opposed to a play set.
Okay, and so where I come out on this, you know, I really look at I think it's important, and we've talked about it all night, are the 5 tests. We've talked about it, and the situation here is unfortunate. I don't have to repeat that, and I think the applicant really has to work on some neighbor relations. However, when you look at those five tests, I agree with the applicant's assessment of those, and for that reason, I would also agree to this variance. So that is a vote of 4-1, so therefore the variance is approved. I do have a question for you, Jim. I provided a resolution. There was an add-on to that, which I think we all support. Should I repeat the resolution and add that, or will you put that into the?
I think you can pass the resolution with the amendment that there be a limit of 12 years.
Right.
Or sooner should the arborvitae come down and not be replaced forthwith.
Right.
And it sounds like you may want to consider another condition. The condition of this variance is that the fence be brought into compliance. So those would be two, you could just simply see if people are willing to accept those 2 amendments to your resolution.
Right.
And then vote it, and you can direct me to provide you with a set of findings consistent with what you said for an upcoming meeting, but you would let vote.
Okay, so do you want me to restate the resolution, or we can just ask if we all support those 2?
All right, I think it would be enough to ask if everybody supports the 2 additions to your resolution, which would be 12 years or sooner, the
Right.
come down and are not forthwith replaced, and that the fence be brought into compliance as a condition of this.
A condition of this variance. Okay, so let me,
May I suggest one more condition as you're
okay,
approval of the variance, and that's that the applicant post a bond to ensure performance under the stipulations. So if the arborvitae dies, the village doesn't have to chase people around to get them fixed or repaired. Or if 12 years from now, if they decide not to take it out, there is a way to basically ensure performance.
I'm not going to ask Paul that question. I'm not so much about the bond, I mean about, you get to year 12 and the playset is still there, what action would you then take? I don't think you need a bond for that, I mean. You're talking just about the tree?
The trees, yeah.
The trees.
Oh, the trees.
And what if there's a drought and we're not allowed to use our sprinkler system, then what happens?
So, I think the answer, let me answer the question.
Yeah.
The question here is for, if there's non-compliance with any condition of the resolution.
Right.
And refusal after all notifies.
Right.
Then the parties would be brought into the local court, or the offending party would be brought into the local court, and before the judge would have the authority to impose fines. In the extreme situation, we would go into Supreme Court for injunctive relief. Because here, you have the condition that if the arborvitae are not maintained, the playhouse comes down.
Right.
Yeah.
You go into, if
I
you
think
came to
that's
that, you go to
Right.
court and get an order.
Right.
And, I said playhouse, I'm sorry, the playhouse, you go
Right.
to the court and get an order that,
Right.
that it come down.
Right.
That would be how the enforcement would be done.
So therefore, Jim, a bond would not be necessary.
I think that's within your judgment, but,
All right, let me ask my,
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. I wasn't asked, but I fully endorse what your village attorney has told you. A bond's not necessary here.
I wouldn't, okay, okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would not be in favor of a bond.
You would not be, okay, okay.
I would be I want to make sure that you're saying that the arborvitae will be replaced, but it has to be a minimum of 8 feet.
Right, well, that's been stated, right. We've got that. The 12-year max is the other provision.
And the building department is responsible for
And,
enforcing.
excuse me, and the, replacing the front fence, it has to be brought within code. Okay? We're all good with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
the play equipment had to, one of the conditions was the equipment itself had to be maintained.
Right.
In substantially the same condition as it is now.
Including color, yeah, yeah. You can't paint it red. They can't paint it red.
No, I think your condition was it stays as in substantially the condition it's in today, including it stays the same color.
Correct.
Can I ask one question? We are assuming that they're 8 feet right now. Is that true? Because to us, we were told they were 6 feet. So you're saying they're supposed to be 8 feet, so I would like that clarified. Because at 6, to us, we were told they're 6 feet, but we still have a good view.
Well, the arborist letter said 7.5 to 8 is the current height, if I read that correctly. So that if one of those dies, they have to replace it. We said with minimum 8 feet.
Well, then I think is someone going to check that they are 8 feet, because we still have, whatever they say in our pictures, we still have a full view of it, so we're not sure that it is 8 feet. And you are, we respect your decision, but you're assuming that they are 8 feet and that we do not have a view of it, so it's not.
Well, what we're really saying is if one of them dies, and let's assume they're only 7.5 feet, we took the higher height, they have to replace it with an 8-foot arborvitae.
You're saying they have to replace it, but whatever it is
If
now
it-
is fine with all of you, that could be 6 feet, that's fine with me now. Is that, but we're very just like to have that clarified. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, if it's of any help to you, this is all dealt with in the evidence of Mr. Edsall's gardener, an arborist. They planted those trees, and he describes very clearly the size of the trees, et cetera. So that's all on the record.
That's correct. That's correct.
They just want to make sure it's factual.
Right. Okay.
We use the same arborist. We have 2 trees in our front yard. It cost me $50,000. The arborist that you used, that we've used for close to 10 years now, our trees are dying.
Okay.
Our trees, there's no guarantee.
Okay, I think we're going to, thank you very much. I would like to adjourn this meeting. Thank you all for attending.